had not stepped inside my Uncle Charles's estate in more than 15 years, and standing at the base of its marble steps again felt like standing at the gates of a world that had long since rejected me. The August air in Savannah pressed down heavy and wet, clinging to my skin as if the outside world wanted to hold me back from entering. My palms were damp, but not from the heat. This place carried a history that lived in my bones, and it was a history I had never been allowed to claim. The front door opened before I could knock. It was the butler, old Mr. Fletcher. His hair now white, his back curved with age. He did not greet me with warmth, only a curt nod before stepping aside. I crossed the threshold into a wave of chilled air that smelled of polished wood, cigar smoke, and the faint metallic tang of something I could not place. The sound of muffled voices drifted from deeper inside the house. The drawing room was just as I remembered. Tall ceilings with ornate plaster molding, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes that no one had touched in decades, oil portraits of our grim-faced ancestors staring down as though judging the living. The curtains were pulled back, sunlight spilling across the heavy rugs, but the room still felt dim, as though the walls themselves absorbed the light. My cousins were already gathered near the bay windows, their designer clothes immaculate, their postures sharp with the unspoken understanding that they were the rightful heirs. Daniel, the eldest, leaned against the frame with a glass of amber liquor in hand, the corner of his mouth already twisted into that smirk I had despised since childhood. Beside him stood his sister, Claire, her hair pinned in a perfect twist, diamonds catching the light as she turned her head toward me. Both wore that same expression, a mixture of polite disdain and mild amusement, that had always made me feel like an intruder in my own family. I chose a chair as far from them as the room allowed, sinking into the leather cushion with my shoulders tight. The murmur of voices quieted when Mr. Green, the family lawyer, entered. He was a man of precise movements, his gray suit perfectly tailored, his shoes gleaming as if they had been polished moments before. His presence carried authority, the kind that demanded silence without raising a voice. He took a seat at the head of the long mahogany table and unfolded a stack of papers. The sound of the crisp pages echoed in the stillness, followed by his steady, deliberate voice. He began reading the will, moving through the formal preamble before arriving at the list of bequests. First came large sums of money, 7 figures at times, handed to cousins, uncles, and aunts who had remained in my uncle's good graces. There were gasps, stifled smiles, the soft clink of glasses being lifted in silent celebration. Next came property, vineyards in California, beachfront estates in Florida, sprawling farmland in Virginia. Each one met with murmured approval. Then came my name. I felt the air shift. All eyes turned toward me, their gazes sharp, waiting to see what the black sheep of the family would receive. Mr. Green's voice did not falter as he announced it. To my nephew, Mark Bennett, I leave the pocket watch that belonged to my father, and to his father before him. He gestured to Mr. Fletcher, who stepped forward and placed a small square box on the table in front of me. Its surface was smooth, the velvet worn in places from age. I opened it slowly, the hinges creaking, and there it was, an old pocket watch. The gold casing was dull with tarnish, the glass face cracked from corner to corner. The hands were frozen in place, pointing to a meaningless hour. There was no ticking, no movement, no life. Laughter broke the tension. It started with Daniel, a low chuckle that spread into a full, mocking laugh, and soon Claire joined in, covering her mouth with her hand as if trying to stifle it, though she failed. Their amusement was a blade, sharp and deliberate. I could hear the whispers from the others, the condescending pity in their voices. I shut the box gently, forcing my face into something neutral. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing how it stung. Inside, though, a knot of humiliation tightened in my chest. I told myself it was only a thing, just metal and glass, but I could not shake the feeling that it was something else, something meant for me alone. The rest of the will passed in a blur. When Mr. Green closed the folder and dismissed us, the room came alive with chatter. Relatives clustered in groups, their voices a mix of triumph and gossip. Champagne was poured, toasts were made, Plans for properties and investments were discussed in hushed excitement. I slipped away without a word, the box clutched in my hand as I walked through the marble-floored hallway and out into the fading afternoon. The sky hung low, heavy with clouds that seemed ready to burst, the air charged in that strange way it feels before a storm. My car was parked at the edge of the long driveway, the tires crunching over gravel as I pulled away from the estate. I drove with the windows down, the humid air rushing in, trying to shake off the weight of the day. But even after I reached my apartment, small, cramped but my own, the watch was still in my hand. I set it on the desk in my living room. The gold was scratched in places, the engraved initials C.B. on the back still visible despite the wear. I traced the letters with my thumb, thinking of my Uncle Charles. His stern face, his booming voice, the way he had looked at me the last time we spoke, as though I were a stranger trespassing on his life. The phone rang. It startled me enough that the watch slipped from my hand and landed with a dull thud on the desk. I hesitated before answering. The voice on the other end was low, almost urgent. "Mark," she said, and I recognized her immediately. Mrs. Lydia, my uncle's housekeeper for as long as I could remember. I had not heard her voice in years. "Do not take that watch to a pawn shop," she said quickly, as though afraid someone might overhear. "Do not let anyone else touch it. Keep it close. And come see me tomorrow morning. There is something you need to know." Before I could ask her what she meant, the line went dead. The room felt suddenly still, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen the only sound. I looked down at the watch. For a moment I thought I saw the second hand twitch. But when I leaned closer, it was still. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. The night after the will reading stretched on endlessly. Rain had started just after sundown, drumming against my apartment windows with an unsteady rhythm, as if nature itself were unsettled. I sat at my desk, the cracked pocket watch placed squarely in front of me, my gaze drawn to it over and over. The engraved initials on the back, C.B. caught the lamplight. They were my uncle's initials, yes, but also my grandfather's. I had never met him. He died before I was born. I wondered how many hands had carried this watch over the decades, how many eyes had studied its face, how many secrets it might have heard in all those years of silent witness. Around midnight, I finally lay down, but sleep did not come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Mrs. Lydia's voice again. Quick, urgent, almost fearful. "Do not take that watch to a pawn shop. Do not let anyone else touch it." By morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets washed clean but heavy with humidity. The air carried the earthy scent of wet pavement and magnolia blossoms. I dressed simply. Jeans, a faded button-down shirt, and tucked the watch into my jacket pocket before heading out. Mrs. Lydia lived in the small caretaker's cottage at the edge of my uncle's property. It was a place I remembered from childhood visits. A cozy little home with ivy crawling up its stone walls and a wooden swing swaying in the yard. When I was young, she had sometimes slipped me cookies or a slice of warm pie from her kitchen, even after my uncle made it clear he did not approve of such indulgences. The drive to the estate felt shorter than it had the day before, but the mood was entirely different. Without the formal gathering of the will reading, the house stood quiet and brooding. The main gate was open, though no one was in sight. I parked near the cottage, the crunch of gravel under my tires breaking the silence. Mrs. Lydia opened the door before I could knock. She looked smaller than I remembered, her hair silver now, her eyes still sharp but softened by something I could not place. Fear, perhaps, or worry. "Come in, Mark," she said, her voice low. The cottage smelled of baking bread and strong coffee. The furniture was simple but well kept, the walls lined with framed photographs of people I did not recognize. She gestured for me to sit at the kitchen table, then poured 2 mugs of coffee, setting one in front of me. "You brought it?" she asked. I reached into my pocket and placed the watch on the table between us. She did not touch it at first. Instead, she studied it as though it were something alive, something that might bite if approached carelessly. "That watch is older than you think," she said finally. "Older than your uncle." It has passed through this family for generations. But what matters isn't the watch itself. It's what it holds. I leaned forward. Holds? You mean like a hidden compartment? She nodded slightly. Your uncle was a careful man. He didn't trust banks, and he didn't trust most people. He kept certain important things close. Things that could change the way people see this family. I frowned, glancing at the cracked glass face. What kind of things? Mrs. Lydia's gaze flicked to the window, as if checking to make sure no one was outside. Documents, photographs, a key. I don't know everything. But I do know there's more to that watch than meets the eye. Your uncle once told me that if the wrong people found it, the consequences would be irreversible. I could hear the hesitation in her voice. So why give it to me? Because, she said, her voice tightening. He trusted you more than you realize. He may have kept you at a distance, but he watched you. He knew you weren't like the others. I wasn't sure whether to feel flattered or wary. The man had barely spoken to me in the last decade of his life, and now I was being told I was some kind of chosen recipient of a dangerous secret. Mrs. Lydia stood and went to a small cabinet in the corner of the kitchen. From it, she pulled a worn leather pouch. She untied the cord and took out a thin metal tool shaped like a crescent moon. This, she said, is the key to opening it. She slid the tool across the table to me. It was cold against my fingers, heavier than it looked. You'll see a small indentation on the back, just under the hinge, she explained. Fit the tool there and turn gently. Don't force it. If you break the mechanism, whatever's inside might be lost. I turned the watch over and found the faint notch she had described. Carefully, I inserted the tool and twisted. There was a soft click, almost too quiet to hear, and the back of the watch sprang open. Inside, instead of gears and springs, there was a folded strip of parchment, yellowed with age. My heartbeat quickened as I slid it out. The paper was delicate, its edges frayed. I unfolded it slowly, revealing a series of numbers and letters written in my uncle's neat, slanted handwriting. Mrs. Lydia leaned closer. Coordinates, she murmured. The numbers meant nothing to me on sight, but the way she said it made my skin prickle. Where do they lead? I asked. She shook her head. I don't know exactly. Your uncle never told me. But he once mentioned a place beneath the estate. A vault. Hidden long before even he was born. If those coordinates are what I think they are, they point to its location. I stared at the paper. The ink faded but still legible. The idea of a hidden vault beneath the house sounded like something out of an old family legend, not reality. And yet, the watch, the tool, the coordinates, all of it was real, sitting on the table between us. Mrs. Lydia reached out and closed my hand around the parchment. Mark, you need to be careful. The others, they'll come for this if they find out you have it. And they won't stop until they do. A sudden knock at the door made us both freeze. Mrs. Lydia's eyes darted to mine. Without a word, she motioned for me to hide the parchment. I slipped it into my jacket pocket just as she went to the door. When she opened it, Daniel was standing there. His expression was casual, but his eyes were cold. Morning, Lydia, he said smoothly. Is Mark here? I saw his car outside. My pulse quickened. Mrs. Lydia hesitated. Yes, but we're in the middle of something. Daniel stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. His gaze swept over the kitchen, lingering on the watch still sitting on the table. Nice little heirloom you got there, cousin, he said. His voice edged with mock sweetness. Mind if I take a look? I moved slightly, blocking his path to the table. It's not for sale. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Shame. Things like that. They have a way of ending up where they belong. The air between us thickened. Mrs. Lydia stood silent, her hand gripping the back of a chair. After a long moment, Daniel's smile faded. We'll talk again, he said before turning and walking out. The sound of his footsteps on the gravel faded slowly, leaving a silence that felt heavier than before. Mrs. Lydia closed the door, her shoulders sagging. "You see. They already suspect. You need to move quickly, Mark. Before he comes back. And before others get involved." I looked at the watch, the parchment in my pocket, and felt the weight of it settle over me. This was no longer about a broken timepiece. This was about something buried deep, something people were willing to lie, steal, and maybe worse to claim. The ride back from Mrs. Lydia's cottage to my apartment was a blur of half-formed thoughts and the rhythmic crunch of gravel under my tires. The coordinates burned in my jacket pocket like a secret I was not ready to carry. Daniel's sudden appearance had shifted something in the air. It was no longer just my curiosity pulling me forward. It was the knowledge that I was already being watched. I parked a few blocks from my place instead of in my usual spot, a small precaution I had never bothered with before. I scanned the street before getting out, half expecting to see Daniel's sleek black sedan idling somewhere nearby. But there was nothing, only the slow drip of water from the eaves and the distant hum of the city. Inside, I laid the watch on the table again. The parchment was still folded in my pocket, fragile against the lining of my jacket. I pulled it out, set it flat, and wrote the coordinates onto a scrap of paper in case anything happened to the original. Then I locked both the watch and the parchment in the small fireproof box I kept at the back of my closet. After making coffee, I sat at my desk and entered the numbers into my laptop. The map that appeared confirmed Mrs. Lydia's suspicion. The coordinates landed directly on my uncle's estate. Not in the house itself, but just behind it, near the western edge of the property where the ground dipped toward a grove of live oaks. I stared at the location, tracing the map with my finger. I remembered that part of the property vaguely from my childhood. A shaded place where the ground was soft, sometimes muddy after rain, with roots that coiled like sleeping serpents. I had never been told to avoid it, but no one ever went there either. The more I looked at it, the more I knew I had to see it for myself. I waited until early evening. By then, the sky had turned the color of tarnished silver, clouds heavy and low. I drove back to the estate, but instead of using the main entrance, I parked along an old service road that led to the western boundary. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the cicadas were loud in the trees. The property fence was old wrought iron, and one section near the oaks sagged just enough to slip through. My shoes sank slightly into the damp ground as I crossed into the grove. The air there was different, cooler, still almost muffled. I found the exact spot easily. A flat stretch of earth between two massive oaks, their branches knotted together overhead like clasped fingers. At the center was a stone slab, half buried under moss and fallen leaves. Its edges were rough, weathered by time, but the center was smooth, marked with faint carvings that had been nearly erased by decades of rain and wind. Kneeling, I brushed away the moss with my hands. The carvings became clearer, interlocking rings surrounding a keyhole. The sight of it made my pulse quicken. I took out the crescent-shaped tool Mrs. Lydia had given me. The metal was cool and damp in my hand. I slid it into the keyhole and turned. For a moment nothing happened. Then there was a deep, grinding sound beneath me. The slab shifted slightly, as though some ancient lock had just been undone. With effort, I pushed it aside far enough to reveal a dark opening beneath. A set of narrow stone steps led down into the earth. I hesitated. The air rising from below was cool and carried the scent of damp stone and something metallic, faint but sharp. Still I descended, my footsteps echoing in the narrow passage. The stairs opened into a small chamber, its walls lined with shelves carved directly into the rock. Many of them were empty, but a few held wooden boxes, their surfaces scarred and stained. In the far corner stood an old iron safe. Its surface rusted but its shape imposing. The coordinates had led me here. Now the question was what my uncle had hidden. I approached the safe. There was no obvious lock, just a wheel in the center and faint etchings along the edges. I ran my fingers over the metal, feeling the grooves. They were numbers, though faint, and arranged in a pattern I recognized instantly. The watch. I pulled it from my pocket. The hands were still frozen in place, pointing to what now seemed less like a random time and more like part of a code. The minute hand aligned perfectly with one of the etched numbers on the safe's wheel. The hour hand matched another. Slowly, I began turning the wheel, aligning each number in sequence. The mechanism inside groaned, then clicked loudly. The door swung open, the hinges screaming in protest. Inside there was no gold or jewelry. Instead, there were stacks of leather-bound ledgers, folders thick with papers, and several small, carefully wrapped bundles. I pulled one open and found photographs, black and white, some faded, others startlingly clear. They showed men in suits, meetings in dim rooms, envelopes changing hands. At the bottom of the safe was a smaller box. Unlike the others, this one was locked with a simple latch. When I opened it, I found a thick envelope sealed with red wax. The seal bore our family crest, a rearing lion framed by laurel leaves. I broke the seal and unfolded the contents. Inside were property deeds, legal contracts, and a document that made my breath catch. An agreement dated more than 50 years ago, transferring ownership of a massive parcel of land in the city's historic district to my grandfather. The strange part was that the signatures on the document didn't match the names listed. Someone had forged them. Footsteps echoed from above. I froze, tucking the documents back into the envelope. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Someone else was in the grove, maybe already on the steps. Quickly I closed the safe, spun the wheel, and slipped the watch back into my pocket. I moved to the shadows near the wall just as a figure appeared at the top of the stairs. It was Daniel. He descended slowly, his eyes scanning the room until they locked on me. "Well," he said, his voice low and steady, "looks like I was right to follow you." The narrow chamber seemed to shrink around us. Daniel's shoes clicked slowly against the stone steps as he descended, the sound sharp and deliberate in the close air of the chamber. Each step seemed calculated, like he wanted me to hear exactly how close he was getting. The dim light from the opening above barely reached his face, but I could still make out the curve of his mouth, a smile that had no warmth. He stopped halfway down, resting his hand on the rail of the narrow stairs. "You have been busy, cousin," he said. "Funny thing is, when you left yesterday, I told Claire you would not be able to help yourself. You never could you? Always poking around in things that don't belong to you." My jaw tightened. "This doesn't belong to you either." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "Oh, but you are wrong. Everything here belongs to the family, which means it belongs to me and Claire. You, on the other hand, you are an outsider. A charity case my uncle tolerated for reasons I will never understand." He took another step down, his eyes flicking toward the safe. "And now here you are in our vault, with your hands on things you should not even know exist." I moved subtly, keeping the envelope close to my side. "How did you find me?" "You made it easy," he said with a smirk. "Mrs. Lydia is a sweet old woman, but she is predictable. You visit her, you leave with something in your pocket, you take the service road back to the estate. Anyone paying attention would have seen it." His words were calm, but I could hear the undercurrent of something harder. Control, possession, maybe even a hint of desperation. He stepped off the stairs, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the damp stone floor. The chamber suddenly felt smaller. He moved toward the safe, running his fingers along its rusted edge. "So," he said lightly, "what did you find?" I stayed silent. His eyes lifted to mine, and for a moment the smirk faded. "You are going to give it to me, Mark. Whatever it is, you are going to hand it over, and then you are going to forget this place exists." I shook my head slowly. "No." Something cold flickered across his face. "You think you can stand against me? You have no idea what you are holding. Those papers could ruin people, powerful people. They could tear apart everything this family has built. Maybe it deserves to be torn apart," I said. His jaw worked, his eyes narrowing. "You sound just like your father," he said quietly. The mention of my father hit me like a blow. My father had died when I was a teenager, after years of being estranged from the rest of the family. The circumstances had never been clear, and my uncle had never spoken of him again. Daniel saw the effect his words had and smiled faintly. Yes, he had the same self-righteous streak. It did not end well for him. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us by a single pace. "What do you know about my father?" "More than you do," he said. "But I am not here to tell you stories. I am here for those documents. Last chance, cousin." I could feel the damp chill of the stone walls at my back, the weight of the envelope in my hand. My mind was moving quickly now, calculating the angles, the distance to the stairs, the risk of trying to get past him. Instead, I made my voice calm. "You want them. Come take them." His eyes sharpened. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly he reached into his jacket. When his hand came out, it was holding a small black pistol. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be," he said softly. "I don't want to hurt you, but if you force me, I will." My pulse hammered in my ears. The air in the chamber felt heavier, each breath harder to draw. I could hear the faint drip of water somewhere deeper in the stone. I weighed my options quickly. There was no way I could overpower him head-on. But the chamber was narrow, and the shelves along the walls were stacked with heavy wooden boxes. Without giving myself time to think, I stepped sideways and shoved one of the boxes off the shelf. It hit the floor with a loud crack, splintering and sending a cloud of dust into the air. Daniel flinched, his grip on the pistol tightening. I used that moment to dart toward the stairs, keeping low. His shout followed me, along with the deafening echo of a gunshot. The bullet slammed into the stone just inches from my shoulder, chips of rock stinging my face. I reached the stairs and took them two at a time, my hand gripping the envelope so tightly my knuckles ached. Another shot rang out, but it went wide, the sound bouncing around the chamber like thunder. I burst out into the grove, the heavy clouds above pressing low, the air thick and close. I didn't stop to see if he was following. I ran through the oaks, my feet pounding the wet earth, the taste of metal in my mouth from the adrenaline. When I reached the sagging section of the fence, I slipped through and sprinted for the service road where my car waited. Behind me, the grove was silent again, but I knew that silence wouldn't last. Once inside my car, I locked the doors and started the engine, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I took a winding route through back streets, doubling back twice to make sure no one was following. Only when I was certain I was alone did I pull over in an empty lot and open the envelope again. The deeds, the contracts, the forged signatures, they were all still there. But now I noticed something I hadn't before. Tucked between the pages was a smaller slip of paper, folded into a tight square. I unfolded it carefully. It was a note, written in my uncle's familiar, deliberate handwriting. "If you are reading this, then you have found the vault. Everything here is yours to do with as you choose. But know this, your father's death was not an accident. The proof is in these papers. Use them wisely or not at all. Others will kill to keep them hidden." My grip tightened on the note until the edges dug into my skin. The words burned into me. My father's death. Not an accident. The sky above darkened, and the first drops of rain began to fall again, tapping against the windshield like the ticking of a clock that had finally started to move. The rain came down harder as I drove back to my apartment, the wipers struggling to keep up with the sheets of water sliding across the windshield. Each turn of the road seemed longer than the last, every red light an exposed moment where I half expected a black sedan to appear in my rearview mirror. When I finally reached my street, I did not park in front of my building. Instead, I circled twice, scanning the sidewalks for any familiar faces, any vehicle that looked out of place. Only when I was satisfied that I was alone did I slip into my usual spot. Inside, I locked the door behind me and pulled the curtains shut before switching on a single lamp. The room felt small, the air heavy with the scent of rain seeping in through the cracked window. I set the envelope on my desk and took a deep breath. The note from my uncle lay on top, the ink slightly smudged where the rain had touched it. Your father's death was not an accident. The words pulsed in my mind, demanding attention. I slid the documents out one by one. The property deeds were old but meticulously preserved, each one bearing a name I recognized from the city's history books. Many of the properties were now worth millions, tucked into prime locations that developers would kill to get their hands on. But it was the contracts that drew my focus. Several were typed, their paper yellowed and brittle, the ink fading. They documented transactions between my grandfather and a series of businessmen. Transactions that involved land swaps, development rights, and, in more than one case, concealed payments routed through shell companies. One contract in particular caught my attention. Dated 27 years ago, it involved the sale of a waterfront property to a company whose name was nothing more than an empty facade. The sale price was a fraction of the land's true value, and the signature on the buyer's side was identical to one I had seen on another, much older document. Only the name was different. Forged signatures. Falsified names. My uncle's note had mentioned proof. I dug deeper into the stack, my fingers brushing against something heavier than paper. It was a small, flat leather wallet, bound shut with a strip of aged ribbon. I untied it, the leather creaking softly, and found a letter inside. The handwriting was not my uncle's. It was my father's. The sight of it made my throat tighten. I had not seen his writing in years. Not since the few belongings I had left of him were lost during a move. His letters were sharp but deliberate, each word formed with the kind of precision he applied to everything in life. Mark, it began, if you ever read this, then I am gone. I have no illusions about what will happen to me once I've uncovered too much. Your uncle and his associates are involved in things that go beyond greed. They are tied to men who do not forgive. I have gathered evidence, but it is not enough to bring them down yet. I have hidden the rest where only you will find it if you are careful. Trust no one, especially not Daniel or Claire. If you think you are safe, you are not. My hands tightened around the letter as I read on. If you cannot finish what I started, burn it all. But if you can, then know that what they did to me was no accident. I was silenced because I refused to play their game. Don't make the same mistake unless you are willing to face the cost. The letter ended there, abruptly, without a signature, as if he had been interrupted. I sat back, the chair creaking under my weight. The room felt colder, the shadows along the walls stretching longer in the dim light. My father's words were both a warning and a challenge, and they pulled at something deep inside me, an anger that had been simmering for years without direction. The sound of tires splashing through rain outside drew me to the window. A black car rolled slowly past, its headlights off. It didn't stop, but it didn't feel like a coincidence either. I pulled away from the glass and moved quickly, gathering the documents and locking them in the fireproof box again. The watch, the letter, and the leather wallet went in too. Then I shoved the box under my bed, making sure it was covered by a blanket and an old duffel bag. Just as I was straightening up, the knock came. 3 sharp raps, evenly spaced. My pulse spiked. Froze, listening. Another 3 knocks, slower this time. I crept to the door, staying low, and peered through the peephole. At first, all I saw was the distorted image of a man in a dark coat, his face obscured by the shadow of the hallway light. Then he shifted slightly, and I recognized him. Mr. Green, the family lawyer. I opened the door a few inches, keeping the chain in place. "What do you want?" He glanced down the hallway before leaning closer. "May I come in, Mark? It's important." I hesitated, then unhooked the chain and let him step inside. He shook the rain from his coat and stood near the doorway, his eyes scanning the room in a way that made me uneasy. "I am going to get straight to the point," he said. "I know you have been to the vault. I know you took something from it." My stomach tightened. "And how would you know that?" "Because," he said, lowering his voice, "your uncle told me about it before he died. He left instructions, and I have been waiting to see who would follow them. I thought it might be Daniel. I'm relieved it was you instead." I studied him carefully, trying to gauge whether this was a setup. "Why?" "Because Daniel is reckless. He would have sold everything to the highest bidder by now. You, on the other hand, you might actually understand the value of what you've found. But that also means you are in danger. More than you realize. He stepped closer, his tone shifting. Your uncle's death was not the only suspicious one in this family. Your father's was the first, but not the last. 2 years ago, a business partner of your uncle's was found dead in his study. The police called it suicide. I didn't believe it then, and I don't believe it now. My chest felt tight. What are you saying? I'm saying that whatever is in those papers is worth killing for, he said. And the people who want them will not stop. You need to decide quickly whether you are going to keep them or destroy them. Before I could answer, a loud bang rattled the door. Not a knock, something heavier. Mr. Green's eyes widened. They're here, he whispered. The second bang was louder, and I could hear voices in the hallway. Without another word, he grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the back of the apartment. Is there another way out? I nodded toward the fire escape in the bedroom. We moved quickly, the sound of the front door being forced open echoing through the small space. I climbed out first, the cold metal slick under my hands. Rain still fell in sheets, soaking through my shirt as I descended. Mr. Green followed close behind. We hit the alley and ran, our footsteps splashing through puddles. Behind us, the sound of breaking glass cut through the rain, followed by voices shouting. We didn't stop until we reached the end of the block, ducking into the shadows of a narrow side street. My breath came hard, my heart pounding. You have to leave the city, Mr. Green said. His voice low but urgent. Tonight. Take the documents somewhere safe. If you stay, they will find you. And for the first time since this began, I realized there was no going back. The rain did not let up. It came down in hard, slanted sheets that blurred the streetlights into smudges of yellow and white. The gutters overflowed, water rushing in shallow rivers along the curbs. Every sound in the night seemed sharper. Tires hissing on wet asphalt, a distant siren, the faint echo of footsteps somewhere behind us. Mr. Green kept glancing over his shoulder as we moved, his jaw tight. We cannot take your car, he said, his voice low but urgent. If they saw it outside your building, they have already marked it. We need something untraceable. Thought quickly. The bus station. It is open all night and there are cameras everywhere. They will not risk trying something there. He gave a short nod. Good. But we go on foot for now. We moved through side streets, sticking to the shadows. Twice we ducked into narrow alleys to avoid oncoming headlights. The city felt different tonight, not just wet and dark but watching. By the time we reached the bus terminal, my clothes were plastered to my skin, my shoes heavy with water. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights made everything look flat and colorless. Travelers huddled in plastic chairs, clutching coffee cups or cheap suitcases, their faces tired and blank. We bought tickets in cash for a bus leaving in 20 minutes, headed south. I did not care where it went. All that mattered was putting distance between us and whoever had broken into my apartment. While we waited, I kept the fireproof box close, tucked inside an old backpack. The weight of it seemed heavier than before, as if the papers inside knew they were now the only reason I was still alive. Mr. Green sat beside me, his eyes scanning the terminal. You understand what you are carrying, he said quietly. Those documents, if released, would destroy Daniel, Claire, and a half-dozen other people in this city. And they know it. Then why help me? I asked. He hesitated. Because your uncle was not entirely wrong about you. He trusted you with this for a reason. Maybe he thought you could do what he couldn't. Before I could ask what that meant, the boarding call came over the intercom. We joined the small line of passengers, the hiss of rain still audible outside the wide glass doors. The bus smelled faintly of diesel and damp upholstery. We took seats near the back, the backpack between my feet. I kept my eyes on the window, watching the terminal lights fade as we pulled out into the storm. For a while, the motion of the bus and the steady hum of the engine gave me a false sense of safety. The city blurred behind us, replaced by stretches of dark highway and the occasional flash of headlights from passing cars. Then, about an hour into the trip, I saw it. Black sedan. It was 3 cars back, keeping a steady distance. Every time the bus changed lanes, it did too. My chest tightened. I leaned slightly toward Mr. Green. "We are being followed." He glanced in the side mirror, his expression darkening. "When we stop, we cannot stay on the bus. We switch to something else. Trains, cabs, whatever we can find." The first stop came 20 minutes later. A small roadside station lit by a single flickering lamp. As soon as the doors opened, we stepped off, moving quickly toward the far side of the lot. The black sedan rolled in moments later, parking near the bus. 2 figures got out, their faces shadowed by the rain. They scanned the area, one of them speaking into a phone. "This way," Mr. Green whispered, steering me toward a line of parked trucks. We wove between them, keeping low, the roar of rain masking our footsteps. At the far edge of the lot, we found an old taxi idling under a shelter. The driver was a heavy-set man with tired eyes, sipping coffee from a paper cup. "We need a ride to the nearest train station," Mr. Green said, handing him a 50 before he could ask questions. The driver glanced at the money, shrugged, and unlocked the doors. As the cab pulled away, I looked back. One of the men from the sedan was now standing where we had been minutes before, scanning the lot with a slow, deliberate gaze. The ride to the train station took 20 minutes. The place was nearly empty at this hour, the only sound the distant rumble of freight trains and the occasional metallic clank from the tracks. Inside, we bought tickets for a midnight train heading inland. The ticket agent barely looked at us, his eyes heavy-lidded with fatigue. We boarded quickly, finding seats in an almost empty car. The rhythmic sway of the train began as soon as we pulled out, the landscape outside swallowed by darkness. For a brief moment, it felt like we had shaken them. Then the door at the far end of the car slid open. Daniel stepped through. He looked almost calm, his hair damp from the rain, his coat perfectly in place. His eyes found mine immediately, and he smiled. "You are making this very difficult, Mark," he said, his voice carrying easily in the quiet car. "But I admire the effort." I stood, the backpack in my grip. "Stay away from me." He took a step forward. "I can't do that. You have something that belongs to me." Mr. Green moved between us, his stance firm. "You do not want to do this here, Daniel. Too many witnesses." Daniel's smile thinned. "Witnesses can be dealt with. And you, Green, you should know better than to take sides in a game you cannot win." The tension in the car was thick, the air almost humming. I could see the faint bulge of something under Daniel's coat. Mr. Green's voice was steady. "You make a move, and you will not make it off this train." Daniel's eyes flicked to me again. "You think you can run forever. Every mile you put between us just means it will hurt more when I catch you." The train lurched suddenly, the lights flickering. The intercom crackled with the conductor's voice, announcing a short delay ahead. The car swayed, and in that moment of imbalance, Mr. Green shoved Daniel backward into the narrow aisle. "Go!" he barked at me. I didn't think, I ran. Through the door at the other end of the car, down the next, my footsteps loud on the metal floor. The train slowed, the sound of rain on the roof mixing with the screech of brakes. I reached the junction between cars and yanked the emergency latch. Cold wind and rain tore into me as the door swung open. We were passing through a small rural station, the platform close enough to jump. Took the leap. My feet hit the slick concrete hard, sending a shock up my legs. I stumbled but stayed upright, turning just in time to see the train begin moving again. Daniel was not on the platform. Neither was Mr. Green. My chest heaved, my heart hammering as I looked around the dark, empty station. The rain was still falling, the only light coming from a single lamp above the ticket booth. Had no idea where I was, but I knew I could not stay. The rain had turned to a fine mist by the time I stepped off the empty platform, but the air was still heavy, each breath thick with the smell of wet wood and rust. The small rural station felt abandoned, just a squat brick building with peeling paint and a single light over the ticket window. No attendant, No other passengers. Only the low hum of the lamp and the distant rush of water from a swollen creek somewhere beyond the tracks. I pulled the backpack closer to my chest. The weight of the fireproof box inside was more than physical. It felt like it was pulling at me, dragging me deeper into something I was no longer certain I could escape. The road leading away from the station was narrow, lined with crooked telephone poles and puddles that reflected the faint glow of the lamp behind me. I chose a direction and started walking. Each step echoed in my head, loud in the silence. After about half a mile, the station light was swallowed by darkness. The only illumination came from an occasional flicker of lightning far off to the east. I passed no cars, no houses, only fields stretching out into the dark. Then, behind me, the sound of an engine. I froze, my hand tightening around the strap of the backpack. The headlights appeared slowly, cutting through the mist as a vehicle approached from the direction of the station. Instinct told me to get off the road. I slipped into the ditch alongside the gravel shoulder, crouching low among the wet weeds. The car rolled past, a black sedan. I recognized the shape immediately, even before the taillights flared red and the brake lights came on. Stop. Doors opened. I didn't wait to see who got out. I moved fast, keeping low, following the ditch until it sloped upward toward a line of trees. The wet grass slicked under my shoes, and my breath came hard and fast in the cold air. Voices carried faintly behind me. One was sharp, impatient. Daniel's. The other was deeper, unfamiliar. Light swept across the field as a flashlight beam cut through the mist. I slipped into the trees, the wet branches slapping against my arms. The ground was soft here, my steps muffled, but I knew it would not hide my trail forever. After about 10 minutes of weaving through the woods, I came upon a faint dirt path, half overgrown with weeds. It sloped downward toward what looked like the outline of an old barn in the distance. The roof sagged and the walls leaned slightly, but it was shelter. I reached the barn just as the drizzle thickened again. The wide doors hung half open, groaning softly in the wind. Inside, it smelled of damp hay and old wood. Shafts of moonlight spilled through holes in the roof, illuminating stacks of rotting boards and rusted tools. I moved to a corner and sat with my back against the wall, setting the backpack in my lap. Every muscle in my body was tight, my ears straining for the sound of footsteps outside. For a while, there was nothing but the rain on the roof and the occasional creak of the old structure shifting in the wind. Then, faintly, a crunch of gravel. I slid the backpack behind me and moved silently toward the gap between the doors. Through the narrow opening, I saw the black sedan again, parked at the edge of the trees. Two figures stepped out. Daniel, and the taller man I didn't recognize. The tall one carried something long in his hand, too thin to be a bat, too heavy to be a stick. Shotgun. They spoke in low voices I couldn't make out. Then Daniel pointed toward the barn. My pulse spiked. I backed away from the door and scanned the barn for another exit. There was a narrow loft above, the ladder missing but the support beams still in place. I grabbed one and hauled myself up, the wood groaning under my weight. From the loft I could see the entire ground floor. The barn doors creaked wider as Daniel stepped inside, the tall man following close behind. "He's here," Daniel said, his voice confident. "I can feel it." They moved slowly, sweeping their flashlights across the dark interior. The beams passed dangerously close to the loft. The tall man's voice was low. "Just grab the bag and let's go. We don't need him alive." Daniel's smile was audible in his reply. "Oh, but I do." I held my breath as they searched, the boards under their feet creaking with each step. Then suddenly, the tall man's flashlight froze on the corner where I'd been sitting minutes before. The strap of the backpack was just visible behind a pile of boards. He moved toward it. I acted without thinking. Shifting my weight, I grabbed a loose plank from the loft floor and hurled it down. It struck the ground with a sharp crack, startling them both. Daniel spun toward the sound, and in that instant, I dropped from the loft. My feet hit the ground hard, my legs nearly giving out, but momentum carried me forward. I snatched the backpack, shoved past the tall man, and bolted for the door. Shouts followed me. So did the sound of boots pounding against the barn floor. Outside, the rain blurred everything into streaks of gray and black. I sprinted toward the tree line, my shoes slipping in the mud. Behind me, the boom of the shotgun shattered the night, splintering wood somewhere to my right. I didn't look back. I kept running, the backpack heavy but secure against my shoulders. The trees closed around me, swallowing the light from the barn. After what felt like forever, the ground leveled out, and I found myself on another dirt road. A dim light glowed ahead, yellow and steady. As I got closer, I saw it was a small roadside diner, the kind that looked like it hadn't changed in 50 years. A neon sign buzzed faintly above the door, and the parking lot was empty except for a single pickup truck. I pushed inside, the warm air hitting me like a wave. A lone waitress looked up from behind the counter, her expression caught between curiosity and suspicion. "You look like hell," she said plainly. "Long night," I managed. I slid into a booth near the back, keeping the backpack on the seat beside me. The waitress poured me a cup of coffee without asking, then moved away. For the first time since leaving the city, I allowed myself to breathe. Just a little. But deep down, I knew the night wasn't over. Daniel had seen my face in the barn. He had heard my footsteps in the dark. And he would not stop until the backpack, and everything in it, was his. The coffee was hot and bitter, exactly what I needed to force my thoughts into order. The warmth spread through me, loosening muscles that had been coiled for hours. The hum of the diner's neon sign outside was almost hypnotic, and for a few moments, I could almost pretend the night's events were something distant, unreal. But the truth sat right beside me on the booth's cracked vinyl. The backpack, heavy and silent, its presence impossible to ignore. Every sip of coffee tasted faintly of metal because my mind wouldn't let go of what was inside. The waitress was middle-aged, with tired eyes and a no-nonsense way of moving. She slid a plate of toast across my table without asking if I wanted food. "On the house," she said. "You look like you need it." I muttered a thank you, though my appetite was gone. The bell over the diner door rang, and my gaze snapped toward it automatically. A man stepped in. Not Daniel. Not the tall man from the barn. But there was something about him. A deliberate way he scanned the room before walking to the counter. He ordered coffee, cash only, and took a seat at the far end, his back to the wall. From there, he had a clear view of the entire diner, including me. My fingers tightened around the coffee cup. I forced myself to glance away, to appear uninterested. But in my peripheral vision I could see him watching. The waitress leaned on the counter, chatting with him casually, but I noticed his eyes flick toward my booth between sentences. After a few minutes, he got up and walked toward the restroom at the back. As he passed, he didn't look at me, just at the backpack. Once he was out of sight, I reached into my jacket and felt for the folded parchment with the coordinates. It was still there, dry despite the rain-soaked night. The rest, the letters, the documents, were locked in the fireproof box inside the backpack. The restroom door opened again. But instead of the man, it was the waitress. She approached my booth, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "That guy didn't go to the bathroom," she said. "He went out the back. You expecting company?" My pulse jumped. "Why?" She jerked her chin toward the parking lot. "Because there's a black car out there now. Pulled in right after you sat down." My stomach sank. "How many?" I asked. "Two. Big ones," she said. "And they're not here for pie." I slid out of the booth, the backpack slung over my shoulder. "Is there another way out?" She nodded toward the kitchen. "Back door leads to the alley. There's a fence, but it's not high. You can cut through to the highway from there." I didn't waste time thanking her. The bell over the front door jingled again, and I caught a glimpse of them, Daniel and the tall man, before I slipped into the kitchen. Pots hung overhead, the smell of frying oil lingering in the air. The cook, a heavy-set man with a white apron, glanced at me but said nothing as I pushed through the back door into the alley. The rain had stopped, but the pavement was slick, reflecting the dull glow of the street lamps. I ran, my footsteps splashing in shallow puddles. Behind me voices shouted. The sound of boots on wet pavement followed. I reached the fence and scaled it quickly, my fingers slipping on the wet wood. Dropping to the other side, I landed in the gravel lot of a closed auto repair shop. A chain-link gate at the far end stood partly open. Beyond it, the highway stretched into the darkness. I moved fast but not fast enough. Daniel's voice cut through the night. "Mark, you're only making this worse." I didn't look back. The shoulder of the highway was narrow, the ground uneven beneath my feet. Headlights appeared in the distance. A semi-truck approaching. The roar of its engine grew louder as it neared. I made a split-second decision and stepped into the lane, waving my arms. The truck slowed with a screech of brakes, air hissing from the lines. The driver, a wiry man with a beard, leaned out the window. "You trying to get yourself killed?" he shouted over the engine noise. "Just need a ride, please." He studied me for a moment, then nodded toward the passenger door. "Get in." I climbed up, the backpack still tight in my grip. The cab smelled of diesel and stale coffee. The driver shifted gears, and we pulled back onto the road. "Name's Joe," he said. "You look like you're in trouble." "You could say that." He didn't ask more, and I didn't offer. The lights of the diner faded behind us, swallowed by the dark. For the first time in hours, I felt a small gap between me and Daniel. But it was a gap I knew wouldn't last. Because if Daniel was willing to walk into a public diner after me, there was no line he wouldn't cross. And the papers in my bag weren't just dangerous, they were bait. The hum of the engine filled the cab, steady and low, a constant vibration through the floor beneath my boots. Outside the window, the highway stretched into endless black, broken only by the occasional flash of a reflective road sign. Every so often, another vehicle's headlights would appear far behind us, a brief reminder that we were not alone in this night. Joe kept one hand on the wheel, the other wrapped loosely around a dented thermos. His eyes flicked toward me every few minutes, measuring, as though trying to decide if picking me up had been a good idea. "You running from someone?" he said finally. Not a question, just a statement. "Something like that. They the type who'll stop looking in a day or two?" I shook my head. "No, they'll keep coming." He nodded slowly, as if that was the answer he'd expected. "Then you ain't gonna make it just by riding along with me. Folks like that, they're patient. They'll wait. They'll watch." I shifted in my seat, the backpack resting against my leg like a live wire. "You've dealt with people like that?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Let's just say I've hauled more than cargo in my time. And I've seen enough to know when a man's carrying something worth killing for." I didn't respond. "What's in the bag?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp on the road ahead. "Documents," I said after a pause. "Old ones. Tied to my family. They don't want them getting out." He made a low sound in his throat. "Family'll cut you deeper than strangers ever will. They already know where you're headed." "No, at least, I don't think so." He took a sip from the thermos, the smell of bitter coffee filling the air. "You got a plan? Or you just running?" "Running for now. Figuring out the rest as I go." He grunted, as if that answer annoyed him. "That's how you end up in a ditch somewhere. You need somewhere they can't follow. Not just miles walls. People who know how to keep someone hidden." I glanced at him. "You know a place like that?" "Maybe." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. For the next half hour, the only sounds were the engine and the occasional crackle of his CB radio. The monotony of the road, the rhythmic passing of the white lane markers, began to dull the edge of my nerves. But it didn't last. Headlights appeared behind us again. Two sets close together. Joe noticed them too. His grip on the wheel tightened. "Been a quiet road until now," he said, his voice lower. I looked in the side mirror. The cars were gaining fast. "Recognize them?" he asked. "Not sure yet. But my gut already knew. The vehicles closed the distance, their shapes becoming clearer in the mirrors. One was a black sedan, the other a dark SUV. Joe swore under his breath. "They're riding in formation. That ain't casual." The sedan pulled into the left lane, creeping up beside us. Through the tinted windows I couldn't see the driver, but I didn't need to. The way they paced us told me enough. It was Daniel or someone working for him. Joe's voice was calm but firm. "Hold on." He downshifted suddenly, the truck roaring as it slowed. The sedan shot forward, caught off guard, and the SUV swerved to avoid rear-ending it. In the confusion, Joe veered into the left lane, then accelerated hard, forcing both vehicles to adjust. "Rule number 1, he said, eyes on the mirrors. "Never let them box you in." The SUV moved to tail us, while the sedan hung back, keeping pace. They were coordinated. Joe flipped a switch on the dash, and the CB radio crackled to life. "Breaker 19, this is Road Ghost. Got myself a pair of shadows southbound on 51 mile marker 218. Anyone got ears on this?" A voice came back almost immediately. "Road Ghost, this is Copperhead. I'm 10 minutes up the road, hauling empty. You want me to make some noise?" Joe's lips curled into the faintest smile. "I'd appreciate it." He glanced at me. "You trust me?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Good. Then keep your head down." 10 minutes later, a pair of high beams flared in the opposite lane. A semi, lights blazing, barreled past us, horn blaring long and loud. The distraction worked. The SUV behind us swerved slightly, just enough for Joe to take the next exit without warning. The sedan overshot entirely, its taillights vanishing into the night. We wound down a narrow 2-lane road, the trees closing in on either side. Joe killed the headlights for a few seconds, then turned down an unmarked gravel path. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere they won't find you tonight," he said simply. After a few minutes, the trees opened onto a clearing. At its center was an old barn, not sagging and abandoned like the last one, but sturdy, with fresh boards patching the walls and a heavy metal door. A small cabin sat off to one side, its windows dark. Joe parked beside the barn and shut off the engine. The silence was immediate, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine. "You'll be safe here till morning," he said. "Place belongs to a friend who doesn't ask questions." We unloaded quickly, and he led me into the barn. Inside, it smelled faintly of oil and dry hay. A cot sat in one corner, a stack of blankets folded neatly on top. "Get some rest," he said. "I'll keep watch for a while." I didn't argue. Exhaustion was settling in like lead in my bones. But as I lay on the cot, the backpack beside me, I kept my eyes open for a long time, listening to the quiet. Because even here, miles from the highway, hidden in a barn in the middle of nowhere, I knew Daniel was still out there. And he would not stop until he had what I carried. The night passed in fragments. I slept in short bursts, waking to the creak of the barn settling, the whisper of wind against the tin roof, the faint shuffle of Joe's boots as he moved outside. Each time my eyes opened, my hand went to the backpack, feeling for the weight of the fireproof box inside. Each time it was still there. Around 4 in the morning, the first hints of dawn began to bleed into the edges of the sky. A pale, cold light slipped through the cracks in the barn walls, outlining the shape of the door in faint silver. Joe came inside, shaking off the chill. "Road's clear," he said. "Nothing moving out there. But I'd bet good money they're still looking." I sat up, pulling the backpack close. "We can't just keep running." His eyes flicked to mine. "No, we can't. Which means you need to decide. Do you want to keep holding that weight until they catch you, or do you want to use it?" I didn't answer right away. My uncle's letter, my father's handwriting, the coordinates, the vault. Every moment since the will reading had been pushing me toward this choice. Joe took a step closer. "You told me those papers tie your family to some bad things. If that's true, there's people, good people, who can make sure they see the light of day." "And then what?" I asked. "I disappear." Wait for Daniel to come knocking anyway. Or, he said, you disappear before they even know who took them public. I thought about it in silence. By the time the sun was fully over the horizon, the decision was made. We loaded the truck and headed into the nearest town, a quiet place with only a handful of streets and a diner that doubled as the post office. Joe parked in the gravel lot, and we walked to the back corner where an old payphone still stood. He handed me a folded piece of paper. On it was a number with no name. They'll pick up, he said. Tell them Joe sent you. They'll take care of the rest. Dialed. The line clicked once, then a calm voice answered. I gave them the barest details, what I had, what it proved, who it implicated. The voice didn't ask for my name, just an address to send someone for the package. 1 hour, the voice said, and the line went dead. We didn't wait in town. Joe drove us out to a rest stop on the highway, a place where people came and went constantly. We sat in the cab, the backpack between us, until a battered green van pulled in and parked 2 spaces away. A woman stepped out. She looked like she could have been anyone. Jeans, windbreaker, hair pulled back under a cap. She didn't look at me when she walked past. Just brushed the side of the truck lightly with her fingertips. Joe opened the passenger door. Go. And don't look back. I grabbed the backpack, stepped out, and followed the woman to the van. Inside, it smelled faintly of gasoline and paper. She took the bag, unzipped it just enough to see the fireproof box, then shut it again. You won't see this again, she said. But you'll hear about it. The van pulled out minutes later, swallowed by the flow of traffic. Joe leaned against his truck, watching it go. You just dropped a torch into a dry field, kid. When it catches, you'll know. And Daniel? I asked. He'll know too, Joe said. And he won't like it. But by the time he figures out where the fire started, it'll be too late. We drove for another hour before parting ways at a junction. Joe gave me a small envelope, cash enough to get me out of the state, and a nod that said more than words could. I didn't tell him where I was going. Maybe I didn't even know yet. But as his truck disappeared down the opposite road, I felt the weight on my shoulders shift. Lighter but not gone. 3 days later, the first headlines appeared. Historic land fraud scheme tied to prominent Savannah family. Forged documents reveal decades of corruption. There were no names in the articles that the public didn't already know, but there was enough to start an investigation. Daniel's face appeared on the news, tight and drawn, denying everything. Claire stayed silent. I kept moving city to city, never sleeping in the same place twice. But even with the distance, I knew this wasn't over. Daniel had lost the game my uncle started, but men like him didn't just give up. Still, the truth was out now. And the watch, the one thing that had started all of this, sat in my jacket pocket. It was still cracked, still silent, but to me it had already done its work.